What's up, all my Ewoks, Tribbles, Droids, and Wookiees? It's Anna, also known as Star Wars Girl. Welcome to my channel. We are going to be painting another eye tonight. But before we get into that, everyone, if you haven't, go follow me on Instagram. It's the Art of Anna TSWG. And this is where I post all of the paintings for the eye project that I have done so far. Today is lucky number 69. Ha 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 ha. But look, it's a perfect grid right now. It's perfect. And I'm about to fuck it up royally by adding another one. Russell, thank you for the super chat. I will read it in a moment. Make sure if you guys aren't, go follow me on my art Instagram. I also have an art Twitter where I try to post everything as well. I think I posted this twice. Let me just delete this. Where can I not delete it? Oh, I'm in the wrong account. I'll delete it later. But yeah, I guess I posted that twice because I'm dumb. But this is where I post all of the arts that I do. That's, you know, aside from just like the painting of the eyes. And then also I have a calendar now that's live on Indiegogo. It is less than $50. It's $48 away from 93,000, and we have 820 backers. Thank you so much, everyone. I sincerely appreciate it. And for those that are asking if you missed out on the first calendar, here it is right here. There are some that I have left over that will go out once they have been purchased. Well, I was going to do that, but then I realized, I'm like, oh, well, that's not fair because you guys backed this campaign. You guys should get the stretch goals. So I actually do have to wait until the campaign's over and whatnot. But also, there's only 3 days left to meet the final stretch goals on this. So once the last 30 days are up, that'll be the end of the stretch goals and whatnot. So we have 3 days left to hit the final stretch goal. So let's make that happen. So go and back this if you haven't backed it yet. Go and share it with your friends and everything. Go share it on the online, on the internet, and help get the word out. But yeah, with that being said, let's get into painting the next eye. All right, Russell, it says, damn it, Anna, how could you let the whole panel go without covering J-Doll's rage stream? It's a great simping video of all time. Because honestly, Russell, it's not my show. And when it's not my show, I don't like to control the way that the topics go and whatnot. I really don't like doing that, so that's why. But yeah, so that's just me. Maybe I'll change my tone about it, but as of right now, it's like if I'm not running it, so therefore, like, I'll just go with the conversation and what is brought up and what isn't, and I don't think they wanted to talk about that. Russell, thank you for your super chat. Did it even occur to you that Brittany date rage video would have made poor little Nicorcata's night? It was very unbreaded of you, Anna. I'm sorry. But you know what? I was like really tired. I'm still really tired. I'm trying to drink caffeine to wake myself up. I was on EFAP this morning. I was on it last night and this morning. I had 2 videos come out today. I'm just tired. I've been really grinding and it's pretty exhausting because yesterday I woke up, I did Flashcast. Then after Flashcast, I did my own painting stream. Then after my painting stream, I went on EFAP. EFAP took a little break, so I filmed 2 videos. I got back on EFAP. I stayed there for many hours, it felt like, and then I needed to get some more work done and sleep and whatnot. So I was pretty exhausted, and even like I slept, but I didn't sleep very well. So I'm just kind of still exhausted, but I can't lose my momentum. So I'm just trying to power through everything. So that's why. But yeah, so I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be low energy. I'm trying to stay as like up on the energies as possible, but that sometimes it's just a lot. And so when I'm on other people's streams, it's nice to sometimes just to sit back and just like go with the flow of the conversation. So yeah, I'm a little a little exhausted. Russell, thanks for that. Yes, I noticed you seem wiped, which begs the question, why the hell are you running this stream? Because I want to get painting. I can't let myself fall into the I can't let myself get lazy. Now I'm going to switch my microphone, so I might sound a little weird. Okay, blue snowball. There we go. Okay, we're on the blue snowball. I have a true crime or the real crime episode. For those that don't know, I like to have these playing in the background while I stream. Here we go. This is the channel. I'm going to be watching the next one, or the one that they just posted today. The Obsessive Gamer Killer, World's Most Evil Killer. So this one they just released today. Matt G, thank you for Super Chat. There's only one answer, Mountain Dew. Oh, there's only one Mountain. I don't have any Mountain Dew left. I do not have any Mountain Dew left, and I'm pretty exhausted. I could watch this 14-hour video, and then we could like pick back up the next time I stream again. I don't know. I like this mic much better than the ASMR mic. Thank you, Anna. Really? I need to figure out how to work the settings on my ASMR mic. Well, it's not even an ASMR mic. It's just a nicer, significantly more expensive quality mic. I think I just have it too close to my mouth, and that's why. Sigh, very well. Good night. Get some sleep. Nope, I'm streaming, Russell. I'm streaming. Speaking of that, I need to move my palette over so I can start mixing paint. Just zoom out a little bit because that's way too zoomed in. But yeah, I'm pretty fucking tired. I think listening to, I guess, serial killer stuff will wake me up a little bit more. Because then I'm like, oh, well, how do I stay alive? All right, we're going to be mixing paint. All right, here we go. Here is the episode. I'm putting it in the chat if you guys want to follow along.
September the 18th, 2008.
I hate this narrator, though.
Frankfurt, Germany.
Ooh, Germany.
A 21-year-old man boarded a plane via Amsterdam to the UK.
Ooh.
He had one thing on his mind, murder.
Oh, that's not good.
He's got gardening gloves with him. He's got a weapon with him. This is premeditated. This is planned. It is very execution-like in style.
Psycho guy.
David Heiss had become fixated with a woman he met over the internet.
Uh-oh.
His obsession was escalating by the day. Any suggestion that he could be dumped was something that would have driven him literally off the edge. In order for Heiss to be with the woman he loved, he had to eliminate the one man he thought stood in his way.
Oh no, is it her dad?
20-year-old boyfriend.
Oh, her boyfriend?
He's going to go from a completely law-abiding citizen to a first-degree killer.
Oh no.
In 1 second.
We should have watched this on
He
Simcast.
stabbed the defenseless man in his own flat 86 times in a cruel and frenzied attack.
Jesus.
And then calmly boarded a plane back to Germany.
Oh my god.
Scene, I can remember it.
This escalated really quickly.
A horrific site. I've been to lots of scenes of horrific crimes, and this one was particularly bad.
Fueled by jealousy and rage, the obsessive online gamer turned into a deadly stalker who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted.
The fuck?
All of this makes David Heiss one of the world's most evil killers.
They say that about every single one of these killers.
Nottingham, England, 2008. The city was in shock after news broke out that a 20-year-old man, Matthew, was stabbed to death in his flat. The killer was a German national, 21-year-old David Heiss, who'd become obsessed with Matthew's girlfriend, Joanna.
David Heiss was absolutely fixated on Joanna. Now, he didn't want her to have a relationship with her.
How hot was this chick? Jesus.
And he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted.
After persistently harassing Joanna for months and not getting his own way, Heiss had come to a fateful decision.
Heiss kills in the name of love, and in doing so, destroys the relationship of actual love.
It would take the efforts of police forces from 2 different countries to help catch the young killer.
Did they know that he did it?
Hayden was a detective chief inspector for the homicide unit at the Nottinghamshire Police Force.
He'd been in the UK for 16 hours. Incredible when you think about somebody that had never been involved in the police, never committed a crime, had got no friends. Everything he'd ever done was on the internet playing war games. It was just incredible.
Heiss was eventually arrested at his home in the districts of Limburg and the Land in Germany.
Wait, did they know that he did it? How did they find that out?
Rashid Balauch worked on the case. It was all over the press. It was reported across the whole of Germany, both in the local and national media.
Did he admit that he did it?
This kind of killing is brutal. We found out that Matthew had been killed with 86 stab wounds. From my experience, this was a very brutal and cruel act. David Heiss deserves not one moment's sympathy. He was a callous, evil man who killed for no good reason an entirely innocent young man. This killer's story begins in 1987. David Heiss was born on June the 19th to a Bolivian mother and a German father in Frankfurt, West Germany. He was the eldest of 2 children. Affluent, he had quite a leafy suburban upbringing, but he was unhappy.
Heiss's childhood is quite a turbulent one. So his parents separated when he was 6, and his mother went on to remarry.
After his parents divorced, it was decided that Heiss would live with his grandparents near Limburg and the Land, and he was effectively brought up by his grandmother and grandfather, to whom he was close.
I think he feels like he's the outcast. And when you have those interruptions, those disruptions in the attachment that somebody has with their parents, their primary caregivers, that starts to have an impact on the relationships that they have with other people.
Heiss's mother remarried and went on to have more children.
I think here we've got an individual who feels like he never really sort of fits in. His mother's formed a new family unit. So I think there's always that feeling of being an outsider, of being awkward, of not having a sense of belonging in the family.
His mother, a nurse, still lived in the town, but he barely spoke to her, and his father was even more distant from him. As a result, Heiss became insular and isolated.
I feel bad for kids, like when their parents send them off to live with their grandparents. I'm like, that's your responsibility. That's your child.
In there for the child is very simple. Love can't be counted. The closest thing to you can just set you aside and go on to a new life as if it's nothing. This creates a desperate sense of insecurity.
I think very early on in those early years, we're starting to see the seeds sown for a disruptive adulthood, for somebody who's going to have difficulties with relationships, but it becomes an awful lot worse than that.
Estranged from his parents, Heiss also struggled to make friends. He was an isolated child. He took refuge, as so many adolescents do now, in the net, in his bedroom, his computer. The teen would spend up to 8 hours a day on the internet and developed a passion for online gaming.
That's nothing.
His social interaction was limited to other gamers.
That's not bad.
Great relationships with his peers. So he seeks solace online. He makes friendships with people in the virtual world.
There's nothing wrong with that.
The world is very different from the real one, because you've got a lack of social cues. You've got that lack of kind of eye contact, of seeing a person face to face. And I think this is something that actually suited him down to the ground.
At school, Heiss excelled academically, that he couldn't afford to go to university. It was a fact that rankled. I think he felt from a very early age that's what I was due. I want to be at university. He was clearly clever enough, but he wasn't possible. Age 19, he decided to join the military, but after just 2 weeks, he was discharged for not being mentally suitable.
Oh.
Instead, Heiss took up an apprenticeship at a textile dye production company. And in itself, that, coupled with his extraordinarily isolated childhood, turned him into an introverted, unhappy, complicated boy who had never come to terms with any kind of relationship. And things would only get worse for the troubled teen when his grandfather died in 2007. All that he'd held dear seemed to be about to be taken away from him, and he desperately wanted something else to hang on to as well. And that is when Matthew and Joanna entered Heiss's life. At this time, Heiss joined an online wargaming forum called AW Bunker. It was here that he met Joanna, an environmental science student who lived in Nottingham with her boyfriend Matthew, a former physics student. Both were fellow gamers who also met online. Later that year, the gaming forum AW Bunker closed, so Joanna and Matthew set up another one called warcentral.com. Joanna is known on the site as Jojo. Matthew's known as Shade. They were brothers, whom he contacts regularly. Increasingly, Heiss's world contracts, so in fact, it simply is on that war game site.
Joanna, Matthew, and another individual have taken on the management of a war games forum, and they managed that forum so that people who were involved in certain games could speak to her and Matthew as experts around how to progress in the game.
And he becomes obsessed, and there's no other word for it. He becomes inhabited by his fellow gamers. With his newfound virtual friends, Heiss, whose nickname was Eagle the Lightning, joined the new forum. He'd taken a particular liking to Joanna.
The fact that she had got ginger hair.
Oh no, she's a ginger.
So he had this massive respect for her, became besotted by her. She was a manager of a forum, and that put Joanna up on a pedestal.
He was able to find somebody who's really enmeshed in his private world. And he not only found a woman who was living in that world, which is relatively rare, he found a woman who was living in that world as the world's creator. And that's what I suspect made Heiss believe that she was for him.
Oh gosh.
Almost the perfect match. It would be the start of an obsessive relationship that would eventually turn deadly. Although she had a boyfriend, Heiss had begun to stalk Joanna by going through her Facebook account and online journals.
He was sending her private messages, which she rebuffed. You know, don't do that sort of thing. I don't need that sort of attention. I'm in a relationship with Matthew, and he wouldn't give up.
Here we've got somebody who is completely isolated. And normally when we're forming relationships with people, romantic relationships, we talk to our friends about it, we talk to our family about it, and they act as a bit of a check on our behaviour. And they might say, oh, I think you're pushing things a little bit too fast here, you might want to slow down, that kind of thing. He doesn't have that kind of social filter on his behaviour.
Heiss's obsession with Joanna was escalating. Even though he'd never met her in person, in May that year, he declared his love for her.
Oh God.
Heiss had become totally obsessed with Joanna and confessed, I love you, Jojo, more than anything else in my life. And he went on, I shouldn't, but I can't help it. And to be honest, it's a great feeling. A great feeling, someone you've never met, you only know on a war game site. It is the most extraordinary thing to say. You know, he has no emotions for reality. It simply exists on the screen in front of him. This is a young man who has lost contact with reality.
You don't
Kind of
say.
fixated with Joanna, and these are behaviours that really are quite abnormal and out of the ordinary. He's doing this quite early on, and he has no kind of concept of the pacing of a relationship, of the norms and the values that inform how we actually come to construct relationships. So I think at this point, Joanna's warning signs were probably going off a little bit.
Ice continued to harass Joanna, and his messages became more intrusive and obsessive.
That's when you hit the block
Perfectly
button.
normal for a human being to bond tightly. What happens to the stalker is they bond too narrowly, too tightly, too quickly, too completely, and that becomes a pathological bond. And that's what happened for Heist. Because Heist bonds with somebody and falls in love not knowing who they are. He falls in love with, what he bonds to is his fantasy about who she is and what she is. And what's his fantasy? It's his perfect match. Two people who've been game forever. If we could just get rid of that one little problem.
Uh-oh.
But she didn't love with somebody else and living with somebody else. Joanna continued to dismiss Heist's messages and told him that she was in a happy relationship with Matthew. This only antagonized Heist, and his fantasies became more sinister. And on the 10th of June, he sent a fellow gamer an ominous message.
Uh-oh.
That is Matthew, Joanna, and David Heist. It was an eerie, indeed almost creepy thing to say. Heist had now become frustrated with the virtual world. He needed to see Joanna in the flesh. Having got her address from another forum member on the 21st of June.
Why were these people giving out their addresses?
Heist can control his enthusiasm. No longer. He has to meet Joanna, having discovered where they live, in a flat above a pub in Nottingham. He goes to visit them. Uninvited, simply turns up on their doorstep. Heist just popped down over the side and said, hello, I'm David. There would be no discussion around them coming to see them. None of the other gamers had ever come to see them within the UK. So for someone to come from Germany was really, really extraordinary.
He wants to basically follow through that fantasy of a relationship with her that he has in his head and make that a reality.
A day before he arrived, Joanna had received a text message from a friend to tell her that Heist had intended to visit them, but they were still surprised by the unannounced visit.
Joanna already knew that this was not right. She really, really didn't like it. But Matthew invited Heist into their flat. They sat and watched football, and they enjoyed their time together. During that time, Joanna was ringing local hostels to try and find somewhere for Heist to stay, and couldn't find anywhere. So they decided to let Heist stay in their flat, which really again unnerved Joanna.
They're obviously slightly astonished that this man should turn up on their doorstep uninvited, but they take pity on him, and he sleeps on the floor. The sleeping arrangements were far from ideal, especially for Joanna.
She relayed a story that as Matthew slept, she lay wide awake, and every time she would look at Heist lying on the floor in a sleeping bag, he was staring at her. So, really, really difficult time for them.
Feeling uneasy about their uninvited guest, the next morning the couple found alternative lodgings for Heist.
In the coming days, they did see him, but Joanna was adamant that she didn't want to see him too much, so she sent Heist off around the country to go and visit some of the other gamers. She thought that was a good idea. And then there was chats behind Heist's back on the forum, which then Heist then found out about, which escalated the issues. That's when it really began to go down.
I think Joanna rejecting Heist is something that he would not have anticipated. I think he's got this very fixed idea of how their relationship is going to go. And I think he is quite knocked back, quite surprised when this isn't a reality.
At that time, Matthew began to understand what had been happening because he'd obviously had conversations with Joanna, he had a conversation with the gamers. They all thought that when they met Heist that he was a bit strange. He didn't want to talk about the games. He wanted to talk about Joanna. So when he arrived back in Nottingham, they really wanted him to go back home.
After spending 3 weeks in the UK, Heiss finally returned to Germany. Meanwhile, Matthew, now fed up with the unwanted attention from Heiss, made his feelings clear with a damning post on the gaming forum.
Matthew decided to write a document called The 19 Reasons Why I Hate David Heiss. It was all the things that Matthew had either discovered or felt that he hated about him, and Heiss really didn't like that.
Furious at Matthew's post, Heiss told a fellow gamer that he had a strong desire to grab his head and smash it against a wall several times. On the 31st of July 2008, just 13 days after he left the UK, Heiss decided to head to England once again.
I know, they can kill him.
Incensed Heiss enough, but he borrowed his uncle's car in Frankfurt and then drove all the way to Nottingham. It's sort of over 600 miles. And it was unannounced again. Nobody knew about it.
This guy's
However,
crazy.
Things didn't quite go to plan. In the early hours of August the 1st, Heiss crashed his car on the M11 in Cambridgeshire after colliding with a truck.
This guy can't drive either.
He then got up in the morning from hospital, a minor arm injury, and got on the train and came to Nottingham. And then Joanna saw him on the street. It absolutely freaked her out. She was frightened and ran into the flat and told Matthew. You know, that really escalated things, and I think at that point Matthew and Joanna clearly thought this was getting out of hand.
The couple made the decision to block Heiss from their forum.
Uh-oh.
Heiss's obsession had begun to completely terrify Joanna. She blanked.
Oh, now it's starting to terrify her? Not the fact that he showed up on her doorstep?
See a psychiatrist. She'd realised that this apparently harmless German was actually potentially dangerous. But she did the one thing that was probably destined to tip Heiss over the edge, and that was to abandon him.
For somebody like Heiss that was clearly a loner, clearly somebody who didn't have friends, was clearly reliant on the chat room and the gaming side all day, all night, to be told to get out of the room and can't be part of the conversation was clearly something that he didn't like.
No, you think?
Other members followed suit, which infuriated Heiss and aggravated him further.
Heiss had threatened to come to England and kill himself in front of Joanna. Heiss had been falling out with all the other gamers. They'd been calling him names and telling him that he was strange. And there was clearly a real hatred within this group, Heiss against everybody else, in particular Joanna and Matthew.
Despite this, Heiss continued to declare his undying love for Joanna. His obsession was escalating by the day, by the week. Any suggestion that he could be
How hot was this chick?
was something that would have driven him literally off the edge. It would have been another abandonment which ran like a thread through David Heiss's life. It was part of what made him the killer that he was to become. Heiss was now at breaking point, and his unpredictable and obsessive behavior would only escalate. He was determined to kill Matthew.
Uh-oh.
I think Heiss sees the world in a very black and white way. He wants a relationship with Joanna. Matthew is a barrier to that relationship, therefore I must remove that barrier. And it really is quite chilling the way in which he goes about this.
On the 18th of September, Heiss made his third trip to England in less than 3 months. Heiss takes another trip to Nottingham. He flies from Frankfurt to Birmingham Airport and then takes the train from Birmingham to Nottingham. The 21-year-old office worker had come well prepared to put his murderous plan into action.
He brought with him enough clothing to keep him warm because he knew that he was going to have to sleep outdoors. He brought a sleeping bag. We have some CCTV footage of him coming to the tram station and becoming really confused because they'd stopped running because he'd arrived too late. So that kind of messed him with it a little bit. So then he had to walk all the way through Nottingham.
At approximately 1 a.m., David Heiss made his way to Joanna and Matthew's flat.
We've got images of him putting his bag down, walking up the road, hiding his bag, coming back, spending a lot of time just thinking what he was going to do.
He doesn't knock on the door. He sleeps outside the flat, inside an air conditioning unit, which was presumably giving out some heat. It's not the depths of winter, but it's still always cold.
Joanna and Matthew had no idea that Heiss was back in the country and just meters away from them.
That's terrifying.
When Joanna got up in the morning in order to go to work, she kissed Matthew goodbye and she walked out.
And he specifically waits for Joanna to go out to work in the morning. He watches her leave. He's now decided that the only way he can have her is if he kills her boyfriend, Matthew.
With Joanna now out of sight, Heiss made his way up to their flat.
He's got guarding gloves with him. He's got a weapon with him. This is premeditated. This is planned. This is something that he intends to do. It is very execution-like in style.
Heiss then knocked on the door.
Uh-oh.
The moment that Matthew opens the door, David Heiss launches himself at him, stabbing him repeatedly. And indeed, stabbing him relentlessly with the knife that he's brought specifically for the purpose.
In a
Psycho.
cool and frenzied attack, Heiss chased Matthew around the small flat.
Matthew got into the fetal position behind the closed door and then managed to escape and go running down the corridor and into the lounge. You could see evidence of where he had banged into items such as doors.
Rose holding to I wonder if J-Doll is thinking the same. Oh God, I hope not.
And then he was pursued, across into the corner of his bedroom, come round.
David Heiss had viciously stabbed Matthew a total of 86 times.
Jesus.
So this is something that is way more than you need to do to end a person's life. He didn't just want to kill Matthew, he wanted to completely obliterate him and have complete control. He was very incensed that this barrier was in the way to getting the thing that he wanted, which was the relationship with Joanna. So killing him wasn't enough.
To stab somebody 86 times actually takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. It tells you that somebody really, really needs to cause that person very serious harm. We would normally describe this sort of murder as a sustained assault. This is not a moment of madness. This is planned, it's calculated.
It's just an explosion of cathartic rage. It has been between him and his true love from the day that they met.
Despite his
This guy's
horrific
crazy.
injuries, Matthew managed to leave a clue to his killer at the scene of the crime.
To Matthew's eternal credit, he managed, in his last moments, to write the first three letters of David Heiss's name in his own blood on his computer console. He wrote D-A-V, presumably hoping that someone would recognize what that meant and lead the police to David Heiss.
In one sense, the fact that he was still conscious enough, still willing enough to try and
That's so
identify
terrifying.
his assailant, to write the first three letters of his name on a monitor shows how strong he was, but at the same time, it tells us that he was conscious, he knew what he was doing throughout the whole of that attack.
Well, he knew he was gonna die.
Tragically, Matthew died from his horrific injuries.
No shit.
His murderer then proceeded to cover up his callous crime.
He had made 2 suicide notes, one for him and one written for Matthew. And the one written for Matthew included personal details that he got out of Matthew using certain historical events, using certain people's names in a note.
But given the horrific scene before him, Heiss realized he could no longer make Matthew's murder look like suicide.
He is also premeditated enough to realize that he's probably going to better make the whole affair look like a burglary gone wrong. So he ransacks the flat to conceal the fact that it's actually a particularly directed attack at Matthew.
Intent on making the attack look like a burglary, CCTV footage captured Heiss carrying items that he'd stolen from the flat and dumping them in a nearby dumpster. But there was something odd about the way he walked.
one of the things that I've never really understood is that Heiss had not brought any spare shoes. His shoes were covered in blood, so he had to borrow some shoes of Matthew's. Matthew's shoes were very small. Heiss was a size 11. So as he's walking up and down the road, he's actually pigeon-toed, and you can see that. He'd also in the...
Why didn't he just wash the fucking shoes?
Stabbed himself and cut his leg.
All right, I gotta adjust my cameras real fast.
With Matthew lying dead in his flat, Heiss casually made his way to Birmingham Airport to catch the 1:20 p.m. flight back to Germany.
Most people, when they've committed a murder, are so horrified at what they've done, it really knocks them back.
He just jumps on a plane and goes back to Germany.
Beforehand, even if it's something that they've planned, the enormity of what they've done, and they're unable to function normally. So the fact that Heiss can do this shows me that he is a very cold and very calculating individual.
He's in the country for less than 16 hours. In that 16 hours, he kills Matthew and leaves him in the flat.
That evening, having not heard from Matthew all day, Joanna anxiously made her way back home from work and made the horrific discovery in her flat.
That sucks.
He rang 3 nines and spent a long time on the phone relaying the fact that she'd found Matthew deceased. And Joanna was in a really bad state, but she was taken to the local police station in Nottingham.
The next morning, Tony Hayden went to examine the murder scene.
It was a horrific sight. I've been to, unfortunately, lots of scenes of horrific crimes, and this one was particularly bad. There was blood on the outside of the front door to the flat. It was absolute carnage. It was clearly evident from the scene that Matthew had been attacked and then attacked again and again, and had been chased through the flat. It was just a terrible thing to see.
No shit.
No witnesses, the police were keen to find out who could have committed such a vicious attack on Matthew.
Well, Joanna was vital. She had a story to tell, and it was imperative that we got to the basic information very, very quickly. And she relayed certain information to us that really set that investigation going. She told us about the fact that Matthew had got no enemies. He wasn't involved in anybody that had got criminal links, all those sorts of things. So very quickly steered us towards the problems that she was having in her life at that time. And they were all centered around David Heiss and all of the harassment and all of the issues that her and Matthew had been experiencing for months.
The police gathered CCTV evidence which showed Heiss in the Nottingham area the day of the murder.
It was one of those where things like dropped into place pretty quickly. It was an extraordinary case for lots of reasons, but actually identifying Heiss as the main suspect was, for us, a relatively easy thing to do. Gathering the evidence of what he did was extremely difficult.
As the news broke of Matthew's murder, fear had spread amongst the local community.
We had lots of problems in the student fraternity. We had officers involved in trying to reassure the student community that it wasn't an attack on them. We had to look at the general community in Nottingham and the fear that this particular crime may have created by trying to reassure them that we had an idea of who it was that had committed the offence. The difficulty was where was he? What might he do next? And we had a real concern about the other gamers that were involved in this investigation as well.
Heiss had thought he'd committed the perfect murder, but he was now the police's main suspect. They just needed to find him. The police were now looking into the killer's background.
Well, we started to make some investigations around Heiss and where he was from. The only thing that we got from some of the gamers was that he maybe lived near Frankfurt, and we didn't have any other information.
After talking to other gamers, the police discovered that Heiss was apparently online the morning that Matthew was murdered.
We had managed to convince his sister that he was going away overnight to a party, and that he needed somebody to manage his online account and then got his sister to log on to the computer. We were really concerned about that. Had we got this right?
Even though he'd killed Matthew, Heiss continued to act innocent to the other gamers.
When he was back in Germany, he began to say, "How is Matthew? And has anybody heard from Matthew?" Well, Matthew was dead.
However, the police were still convinced that Heiss was their main suspect. But since he was an online gamer, they had no idea where to find him. Then there was a breakthrough in the case. Information came through about the car crash that Heiss was involved in back in August.
And the fact that the police had attended that crash, and what had happened was that some items had been sent to Heiss from the car by the Chevrolet. It's like the European version of the recovery service in the UK. And that gave us a couple of addresses that linked to Heiss. So we were then able to go to the courts in the UK.
They do realize that they could have just looked up his fucking computer IP address and found him that way. Oh my god, these guys need like nerds. Nerds could have found this dude like immediately.
With the German authorities. Ufa Quimbach and Rashid Barouch were assigned to the case.
After receiving a formal request, we carried out the background checks. The only thing we knew was that he was a young man that lived in the district of Limburg-Kalburg. He didn't show up in anybody's records, so we found nothing. It was a total blank slate for us.
Heiss, unaware that he was being investigated, decided to send Joanna a message on Facebook 4 days after he'd murdered her boyfriend.
Oh my god.
He wrote a note which said, "I'm sorry for causing you so much trouble. I hope you won't lose all your hope. We will be there for you." That gives you an indication of the distortion of Heiss's mind. We will be there for you? No, I think what he really meant was, I will be there for you. What he really hoped is that Joanna would fall into his arms, that she'd somehow be won over by the fact that he'd eliminated her boyfriend.
This is a very clumsy attempt at trying to worm his way back into her affections. And this really does, again, show his complete lack of judgment, his complete lack of awareness of social norms, of ways to behave when somebody has died.
It reflects a complete inability to see the world from the perspective of the victim.
Meanwhile, the German authorities now had an address for Heiss, and on the 24th of September, he was finally arrested.
David Heiss wurde damals festgenommen von einer
David
Spezialeinheit
Heiss was arrested
und
by
hat
the
wie gesagt
special unit,
festnehmen
and he
lassen,
didn't
wurde
resist
zum
arrest.
Dienststelle gebracht.
He was brought to our
Kollege
office,
Quimber
and my
kam
colleague
dann
Quimbach and I
anschließend
went
zu
over
der
the
Sache
case with
vernommen.
him.
Die haben ihn belehrt damals,
We
haben
made
gesagt,
him aware
dass
that he was
Verdacht
accused of committing a murder in
begangen
Nottingham,
zu haben.
to which
Er hat
he
auch sofort
immediately
gesagt,
responded
ich
by
möchte was
saying,
sagen.
I was in Nottingham, and I'm
froh,
glad
dass
that
ich
I was
festgenommen worden
arrested,
bin,
because
weil
I
ich
wanted
die
to
Sache
break
von
away
mir,
from it all.
lossprechen.
Was Besonderes.
It
Es
was
gibt
strange.
Jäger, die sprechen
There are
über
offenders who
drüber,
don't say a single
aber ich
thing.
habe so den
I got
Eindruck
the
bei
impression
ihm,
from him
war
that he was
verwundert, dass er
relieved
mit
if he
jemandem
could talk to
darüber reden
someone.
konnte. Ja, das
He
war
almost
die
got the
Tat
whole
von der
thing off his
Seelenmalerei.
chest.
Heiss continued to open up to the German detectives.
Nachdem ihn belehrt hatte,
After we informed
Angaben
him
gemacht,
about
dass
his
kein
situation,
Recht
he
hat,
told us that he didn't need a solicitor, and he wanted to tell us what happened. We started the interrogation around 10 p.m. and it finished around 3 a.m. During that time, he told us how he met Joanna and Matthew over the internet and how he fell in love with Joanna. He said that he visited Joanna twice in Nottingham, and the third time he went over was mainly because he wanted to punish Matthew for the bad things he'd written about him on the internet. We asked him whether at the time he had the intention to kill him. He said no, he wanted to punish him, but he had taken the knife with him. Heiss then gave his version of what happened that fateful day.
Dann hat uns geschildert, dass morgens
He told us
vor
that
dem
he
Haus
waited until
gewartet
Joanna had left for
und
work
hat
that
dann
morning,
gesehen, dass
and then
Joanna auf
went
die
up to
Arbeit
the
gegangen
flat.
ist, hat an der Wohnung geklingelt
Matthew opened the door and there was a fight.
und dort gab es direkt
He
Streit.
hit Matthew to the ground with the first punch,
punch
and then added countless stabs with the knife during the fight.
zahlreich Stiche zugesetzt. Das war so,
That was how David
wie
Heiss
David
described
Heiss
it.
das gefühlt. Die Vernehmung war
During the
David sehr
investigation, David
klar,
gave clear
konnte alles
details
noch
about
detailliert
everything.
schildern,
He
musste
had
aber
to
2-3
stop 2
Mal
or 3
unterbrechen.
times
Da
because
kamen
he
diese
started
Tränen.
to cry.
Waren absolut echte
They were
Tränen,
genuine
weil das
tears
waren jedes Mal
because he
die
just
Momente,
realized
wo dann
exactly what he had
realisiert
done.
hatte, was hat eigentlich getan.
Heiss hadn't admitted a murder. He'd admitted that he'd killed Matthew, but suggested that he went there to talk to Matthew and Matthew had attacked him and he had to stab him in order to defend himself.
Tony, along with a German-speaking detective, flew out to Frankfurt on the 25th of September.
The German officers received us extremely well. They took us to Heiss's house and they showed me what they had found. Below his bed was a suitcase. Within the suitcase was blood-stained clothing. Lots and lots of information that clearly reassured me that we got the right individual.
The items found in Heiss's room revealed the true state of mind of the killer.
So Heiss actually
That he's
hung on
batshit
to
crazy?
some items that were related to Matthew's murder. So he hung on to the bloody clothes. He hung on to a fake suicide note. And often killers will do this, especially if this killing holds specific significance to them. It's something that has been important for them, for their sense of power, for their sense of status. And often they will revisit these items. They will relive that moment when they were all powerful, when they got control back.
He kept them as a trophy to remind himself that he had dispatched his love rival. But what is absolutely undeniable is that Heiss, who got rid of the weapon, found it impossible to get rid of the clothes he wore. Now that says a lot about his delight in the killing of Matthew.
Psycho.
On the 25th of November, it was agreed that David Heiss would be extradited to England and he was charged for murdering Matthew. His trial was set for April 2009 at Nottingham Crown Court. None of Heiss's family attended.
Jeez.
Soweit wir das
As
jetzt
far as we
haben,
could
hatte
tell,
auch
we never had any contact with his
der
parents
Ablehnung
while he was in custody in England. It seemed really unusual to us for parents not to make contact with their son.
Aber warum das
I
so
can't
war,
give you a reason why, even if I wanted to.
Details of what happened on the morning of the 19th of September were presented to the jury.
The critical element there was the crime scene examination. It was meticulous. It showed exactly where the stabbing started and where it finished. And we were able to show how Matthew defended himself. He'd got knife wounds across his hand where he'd grabbed the knife. And Matthew was a strong, determined young man that fought for his life, like anybody would. But he tried his utmost. He ran away, he fought back, he grabbed the knife.
Jesus.
He did what he could to save his own life. But he was just overpowered and clearly very surprised.
Heiss claimed that he'd only gone to confront the couple after they'd started to abuse him on the gaming forum, and that he'd attacked in self-defense.
A feeble argument, to put it politely. If you killed someone in self-defense, the first thing you would do is run and find a policeman and admit it at once. You wouldn't get back on a plane and fly to Germany. You wouldn't dispose of the weapons. You wouldn't keep the bloody clothes under the bed.
The calculated killer even tried to manipulate the jury.
His English was immaculate, and he was trying to tell the jury how it was all Matthew's fault. And he spent 2 days doing that, and I've never seen a suspect do that in a trial before. So it was a very, very difficult, very long trial. We had to prove everything. We had to bring officers from Germany to give evidence.
Wurde damals als Zeuge zu dem Prozess vorgeladen.
I was asked to be a witness at the hearing.
Was David
The
Heiss
judge
in der
wanted to
Vernehmung
know what
ausgesagt
David
hat.
Heiss had
Das habe
said
ich
to
dann
us
auch
during
wieder
the
so detailliert
interrogation.
geschildert, wie
And
David
once
Heiss
again,
uns
I
angegeben hat,
described
wie
it
es
in
zu dieser
detail.
Tat gekommen ist.
The evidence against David Heiss was undeniable.
CCTV of him coming from Birmingham to Nottingham. There was the bloodstains, the walls, elaborate evidence shown to the jury of the spatter, DAV written on the computer screen. The evidence against David Heiss was utterly compelling.
On the 11th of May,
Well, what happened with
after just
Joanna?
2.5 hours, the jury found David Heiss guilty for the murder of Matthew. Mr. Justice Keith told Heiss that Matthew's death involved a substantial degree of both planning and premeditation, and that he brought the knife to kill Matthew and then make it look as if he killed himself. David Heiss was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years before parole.
He was only sentenced to a minimum of 18 years because of his age. If he'd have been older and he got a lot longer term, this was an horrific crime.
I think had he not been caught for Matthew's murder, I think this is an individual who would have at least gone on to harm other people, if not kill somebody else, because he was prepared to go to these extreme lengths to get what he wanted. Who's to say that he wouldn't have done the same with the next thing that comes along in his life that he can't have?
What makes David Heiss one of the world's most evil killers is the total lack of conscience, remorse, empathy, sympathy with the victim. He is a machine who has disappeared into a virtual reality, who is not anymore a man, but is suddenly simply a symbol.
Heiss was a selfish, obsessed individual who callously killed an innocent man in cold blood just because he didn't get what he wanted. His meticulous planning and depraved obsessive urges make David Heiss one of the world's most evil killers.
They're all evil. Alright. That one is done. Let's watch another one. Oh shit, it's super bright. Let me turn this down. There we go. Joanna survived, I know, but shit. Like, they didn't talk about her in the trial. Alright, so this one, Glasgow's first godfather of crime. Nah, I don't care about crime. Well, I guess I kind of do. Killer babysitter. 19th century killing machine. Let's watch that one. Here's the link for you
Real
guys.
Stories Tapes True Crime is your new true crime podcast fix. In our first season, we'll explore suspicious death bag and every.
Oh, just popped my neck. It felt so good.
My name is Martina Cole. I'm a crime author.
Oh, what's up, Lethal?
The nature of true crime often.
Hey, not home, but wanted to say hi. Hope you're well. Oh, thank you, dude.
In my opinion, the most
Thanks for the super chat. I hope you're well too.
The women that murder time and time again. In this series, I'll be shining a light.
Oh, it's the feminist lady again. Dang it.
So welcome to the dark world of the labor killers.
As a feminist.
In my work as a crime writer, research is everything, and I don't just focus on modern criminals. My fascination with women who kill has unearthed more than a few lady killers through history. This is the story of Mary Ann Cotton. Born in 1832, she was a 19th century killing machine, and no one in her life was safe. Not her husband, not her stepkids, not her mother, and certainly not her own children. A chilling serial killer who may have killed up to 21 people. For her crime, she was hanged in Durham Jail in 1873.
For people like Mary Ann Cotton, life wasn't work. You had to do whatever you had to do to survive.
When I came across this story, I was immediately fascinated by Mary Ann Cotton. What really got to me was that I just couldn't understand her crimes or the motive behind them. They called her a Black Widow.
Black Widow to me can be defined as somebody who keeps murdering people who finish up dying, and as a consequence of the relationship with you. So I think there's little doubt that she certainly was that.
Mary Ann made a bit of a living through her time killing husbands and children for personal gain. So that she is my definition of a Black Widow.
Mary Ann Cotton was a very ordinary woman. That's partly what is so fascinating about her. She was not unattractive. She had 4 husbands, 12 children, and 3 stepchildren. She murdered 11 of the children.
Oh my God.
And
Men found her attractive, but of course, as soon as they lost some sexual prowess, as soon as they lost their jobs or became ill and couldn't get the money to bring into the house, she was after the next man. And she was making love to her next husband while killing the husband she was with.
Everything that Mary Ann Cotton did pointed to her having an uncaring, brutal nature. Cold, calculating, and chilling, Mary Ann killed rather than cared for her children.
You're not born evil. You become evil by your experience and what goes on in life, and something triggers in your mind.
Mary Ann Cotton, Lee Robson, was born into a small mining family in Low Moorsley, County Durham, in October 1832. Her father was a miner, her mother a miner's wife. This was the only life she knew. In 1842, when Mary Ann was only 10, her father died in a mining accident. What impact it's had on the young girl we can't ever know, but it left her mother a young widow with 2 small children to raise.
Mary Ann Cotton was born Mary Ann Robson, and the interesting thing about the surname Robson is that it comes from the Borders. The Robsons, back in Elizabethan times, were one of the Border reaving clans, the notorious murdering tribes that lived up there in the Borders.
The Reavers, or Raiders, were Scottish clans who patrolled the Anglo-Scottish borders from the 13th to the 16th century. They terrorised the border villages, thieving and taking whatever they could lay their hands on. Could Mary Ann have descended from the infamous Robson Reavers?
Right from the word go, there's clues about Mary Ann that she's a bit of a handful. I mean, she's brought up in a Methodist atmosphere. The Methodists were very strict and very disciplined. But as soon as her stepfather moves in, George, she moves out.
So come 1848, 16-year-old Mary Ann decides to try and make a break and take her first steps away from the hard mining life she knows so well.
The towns and villages of Durham in the mining areas were mostly dominated by mining and little else. There wasn't a great deal of opportunity for other work. So the likelihood of her becoming a miner's wife and continuing to be so was quite high.
She knew nothing else. She saw it coming. She saw it coming through her mother, and she saw it coming through her father, who was killed down the pit. If your father falls down the mine shaft, you know what you've got coming. Her first taste of middle-class life when she worked at 16 for a colliery manager at Southampton. I think she might have had a taste there, that life actually could be a bit different.
Mary Ann Cotton wouldn't have had a particularly enjoyable or easy life working as a domestic servant or a nursemaid. The days would have been very long, up at dawn and to bed, after the person that she was working for had gone to bed.
She would be a cleaner and a cook and a maker of fires and somebody who cared and tended people when they were not good, particularly children.
The lady she worked for had at least 12 children, so there was a lot of work involved. And I think her experiences with them may have given Mary Ann a lifelong dislike of kids.
Life as a domestic is a thankless one. Fortunately for Mary Ann, her saviour comes in the shape of William Mowbray, who she marries in 1852. The newlyweds immediately leave for Cornwall, where Mowbray has secured a job on the railways. Far from being an escape from the drudgery of a mining life, the West Country brings its own miseries, and Mary Ann finds herself surrounded by death.
It seems she had 4 or 5 children in Cornwall, in a kind of railway excavators shantytown, and none of them lived. Now, the 19th century didn't really talk about depression, and it didn't really talk about mental illness. But if I was going to think about where Mary Ann begins to feel ill in some way, I would say losing
4 or 5 children in a railway shanty town, far away from home, aged 20 years. Not good.
So did the children she had in Cornwall die of natural causes or at the hands of a ruthless killer? Is this where Mary Ann started on a fatal path that would end with a noose around her neck? It's always difficult to comprehend what drives a person to kill, and in a bid to understand that
I'm gonna say this bitch is psycho.
I really had to look at the life she lived.
She just wanted some change.
Mary Ann and William returned from Cornwall to County Durham with one surviving child in tow, a little girl called Margaret Jane. The mining industry is booming and William soon gets a job down the pits. Mary Ann is once more back in the life she was trying so hard to escape from.
The population of County Durham increased from about 150,000 in 1801 to about 1.2 million in 1901. So there's a massive change in population.
The Industrial Revolution was at its height and coal was in big demand. Britain was constructing, manufacturing and exporting both at home and across its vast empire.
As the collieries expanded in the 19th century, so did the colliery villages. And it had a massive impact on the people living there. There was people coming in from all over the country, and the most direct impact it had on people's lives was the pressure it put on services. There was more demand for houses, there wasn't much sanitation, it affected everybody's life in every aspect.
The priority of the coal owners was to find accommodation for the miners to live in. You wouldn't necessarily have churches, for example, or something to keep the population stable. Pubs would be built straight away, they were the priority.
By 1857, Mary Ann may have been resigned to her lot as she starts to build her family with William. She gives birth to a girl, Isabella Jane, in September of 1858. More children quickly follow.
You could have a situation where you had 6 or 7 children in a family sleeping in a damp room, say 8 foot by 8 foot, along with the mum and dad all sleeping cramped together. Very unpleasant situation.
Families of 8, 10, 12, 16 children were not uncommon, and women could spend 20, 25 years basically in the process of pregnancy, childbirth, those first early months, and then repeating itself over and over again, and it had a massive impact on a woman's health.
On June the 22nd, 1860, Mary Ann's first child from Cornwall, Margaret Jane, dies. The following year, Mary Ann has another baby. She also calls this child Margaret Jane. 2 years later, she has a son, John Robert. By 1863, Mary Ann's life is a drudgery, a continual battle to feed and clothe her growing family.
The miner's wife was involved in looking after the family, in cooking, in doing all the washing and bringing up the children. The childbearing role was a major job for a miner's wife.
Mary Ann knows from first-hand experience how dangerous mining life can be. Her father died in a mining accident, so she quietly encourages William to take out an insurance policy should their circumstances take a turn for the worse.
But in the 19th century, private capitalist companies are beginning to understand that there is a huge market in penny a week subscription. And the man from the Prue becomes a famous figure in working class terrace streets.
The insurance policy pays off as young John Robert dies aged 12 months. He's soon followed by his father. William Mowbray died of typhus fever in January 1865. Mary Ann makes her first claim.
Mary Ann gets £35 from insurance company for the death of William Mowbray. £35 then is
about half a year's labourer's wages. So it's a tidy sum.
Mary Ann, now widowed, moved to Seaham Harbour with her 2 remaining daughters. Within weeks of arriving, one of the girls, Margaret Jane, died of typhus fever. She was just 4.
Jesus.
Perhaps feeling the stress of losing more children, Mary Ann sent her remaining child, Isabella, to live with her mother. Mary Ann Cotton is now free from children and has no husband. She has cleared the decks once more.
In the 19th century, people did move on quite quickly from marriages, both men and women. It was very, very hard to be on your own, no matter what sex you were. Quite often you get men who've been widowed, normally through their wives died in childbirth, moving on quite quickly because they need somebody to look after the children, to look after the household. And it's the same with women. There were very, very few alternatives available.
By 1865, Mary Ann tries once again for a different life. She starts to work as an untrained fever nurse at the infirmary in Sunderland. It is here that she meets and befriends a patient, George Ward. Within months, she becomes Mrs. George Ward.
Marriage is incredibly popular in the 19th century. And in the coal field, there's an obvious reason for it. It's called woman labour. All those things Mary Ann did so well, cook, clean, skivvy, produce children, and offer sexual relationships, all these things are in high demand. Marriage was the way in which men got the labour power and women got some kind of support and a very small amount of legal protection.
Mary Ann finds life as Mrs. George Ward pretty dull, even without any children to look after. Never one to sit still, Mary Ann soon embarked on an affair with a married man, Joseph Nattrass. A year and 2 months after her marriage to George Ward, he suddenly dies of cholera and typhoid fever.
Seems like everyone's getting typhoid.
Mary Ann then replies to an advert in a local paper for domestic help from a recently widowed man, James Robinson.
James Robinson had a wife and 5 children. The wife died, and the youngest of the children was sickly, so he clearly felt the need to have some sort of female help in the house. Apparently only Mary Ann really wants attention. She may have attracted him physically.
Is this chick hot or something?
The Robinson baby dies within days. A few weeks later, Mary Ann is summoned back to her poorly mother's side at Seaham Harbour.
She went to visit her mother. She stole some things from her mother. Her mother noticed and taxed her with it. And the next thing we know, her mother's dead.
Bitch is poisoning them, what?
After the death of her mother, Mary Ann returns to the Robinson household with her daughter from her first marriage, Isabella Mowbray. Within weeks, 2 of Robinson's 4 surviving children are dead, and so too is Isabella. 4 months later,
the fuck?
in August 1867, Mary Ann, again pregnant, marries James Robinson. Their daughter Margaret Isabella is born in November. She lives for just 3 months. Death seems to follow Mary Ann around. She has decimated the Robinson family. So how could James even contemplate marrying this woman?
In the society in which she lived, he was virtually obliged to it. He would have been disgraced otherwise. But on the other side of the coin, his 3 sisters didn't like Mary Ann, so he was battling in 2 different directions. They certainly didn't want anything to do with this woman, but she was pregnant. What was he going to do about it?
Margaret Isabella Robinson dies in February 1868. 4 months later, Mary Ann gives birth to George Robinson, the last of the children she would have as the wife of James Robinson.
Oh, God.
The marriage had finally crumbled.
He found out that she'd been doctoring his passbooks for the building society, making amateurish alterations to the amounts. She'd stolen £50 from his building society and got in debt for perhaps another 60. The poor man had gone from comparative prosperity to near ruination without even knowing about it.
Her marriage to Robinson is over, but even with so many deaths surrounding Mary Ann, suspicions are not aroused. Deaths at this time are common, and a massive cholera outbreak sweeping across the area claims even more lives.
Even simple things like colds and flu could kill children in particular who are all very weak, but probably the biggest threat to health was just poor sanitary conditions and the effect that it had on people's lives. You get people dying of gastric fever. In the case of Mary Ann Cotton, she used that to great effect to explain the death of many of her husbands and children.
I suspect that she was canny and that she knew very well that what she was doing was against the law. And in fact, that the more she did it and got away with it, the more she was motivated to keep on doing it. It was almost a feeling of power for someone who had absolutely no power in the rest of her sphere. She was nobody. And yet she had the power to get rid of people who were in her way and make them pay her way, as it were.
In a way, Mary Ann shows us a woman's industrial revolution too, although in the most perverted way. And this is an industrial revolution. The worst possible circumstances for women. And that is death rates chasing birth rates up the graph. And that's basically what it's like in her environment.
The infant mortality rates were quite high. I think in some areas of the northeast, as many as 2 in 10 children wouldn't make it beyond their first year.
The figures for the Durham coalfield are simply murderous for the 19th century. The Durham coalfield had an infant mortality rate of 180 per 1,000 live births. Bangladesh, at the moment, has an infant mortality rate of 52 per 1,000. And the English average is 6. The registration of deaths, the registration of births, particularly for children, is notoriously inadequate. Now, in this world, Mary Ann can become almost invisible. The deaths of children is not a big deal.
Life is cheap and children expendable. The high infant mortality rate proves to be a great smokescreen for a serial killer. So what was Mary's weapon of choice?
Poison.
It was well known in medical and nursing circles that arsenic was colourless, tasteless, odourless.
Called
it.
It
only really shows itself after the death, long after the death.
The poison arsenic is as common as bleach. It's readily available and used throughout the house to wipe on woodwork to kill vermin. It's used in candles, wallpaper, even in sweets.
Arsenic can be bought just like any other commodity in various kinds of shops, in ordinary grocery shops, and pharmacists and druggists shops, etc., all the way up and down the country. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning will vary depending on the method of delivery, if it's done in a big dose or in small incremental doses.
It seems that she's murdering the children with tiny grains, bit by bit.
Generally speaking, we have diarrhea, cramping, pains in the stomach and the intestines,
Mary Ann has found the perfect killing method and she goes undetected. She has now murdered up to 11 members of her own family. By the beginning of 1870, she's once again without the responsibility of children and she's searching for husband number 4. In trying to understand Mary Ann Cotton's story, I have discovered a woman who has scanned the card of human life. By 1870, at the age of 38, she had already killed up to 11 members of her own family, and she didn't stop there.
I think moving around gave Mary Ann an opportunity to commit crime, certainly because people would not necessarily know her history, and the fact that she remarried several times, they wouldn't necessarily even know what her previous names were. So she had an opportunity in County Durham that maybe she might have been able to pursue in other parts of the country.
By March 1870, Mary Ann is on the lookout for meal ticket number 4. She decides to move in with an old friend, Margaret Cotton, her widowed brother Frederick, and his 2 small boys, Fred Jr. and Charles. Mary Ann is already making plans.
She was there several weeks, and in that time, Margaret Cotton was unwise enough to tell Mary Ann that she'd saved about £60. Now, if anything was to happen to Margaret Cotton, she had no children, that money would go to Frederick.
3 weeks after Mary Ann Cotton's arrival, Margaret Cotton dies. Her former lover, Joseph Nattrass, takes lodgings on the same street to Mary Ann and the Cotton family.
She'd done much to try and catch up with Nattrass, it seems. Maybe coincidence that their paths kept crossing over. But there again, this may have been all part of the plan.
Nattrass, she always, it was said, he was the one, if any of them, she adored the most.
Not only is she sleeping with Nattrass, she's sleeping with Frederick Cotton. The inevitable soon happens.
Within weeks, she was pregnant by Frederick Cotton, and so he too felt morally obliged to do something about it, the honourable thing about it. But it's also quite possible that Joseph Nattrass was the father of the subsequent child.
Mary Ann never gets a divorce from her third husband, James Robinson. She bigamously marries Frederick Cotton. Their child, Robert Robson Cotton, was born at the beginning of 1871. The Cotton family now have 3 children. A year and 2 days after his marriage to Mary Ann, Fred Cotton dies of typhoid and hepatitis. After a simple wait of 3 months, Mary Ann moves in her lover, Joseph Nattrass. But Mary Ann soon gets bored of the situation. She gets a job at a local hospital where she meets a patient recovering from smallpox. Mr. Quick Manning is a wealthy customs and excise man and a very eligible bachelor.
Once Quick Manning appears on the scene, he's obviously so much better at catch. It seems that Mary Ann turned against Nattrass. Now she wants everybody out of the way. There's no way she can persuade a bachelor like Quick Manning to take on kids from another man's marriage.
She does seem to be clearing the balls every now and again and wanting to start again. I think she's in her own mania. She's seeing the world through her own mania.
It's 1872, and Mary Ann embarks on a final killing spree that will be her undoing. On the 10th of March, Fred Cotton Jr. dies of gastric fever. On the 28th of March, Robert Robson Cotton dies of teething and convulsions. On the 1st of April, Joseph Nattrass dies of typhoid fever. It looks like Mary Ann has now killed 16 members of her family.
Jesus.
No one, not a single husband, suspected her. All these deaths of their own children from other marriages, all from arsenic. The husbands would come home, find their children writhing in agony, dying from arsenic.
But suspicions were being aroused by the local parish relief overseer, Mr. Thomas Riley. who thought there was something very suspicious about the number of deaths surrounding Mary Ann Cotton. She now has just one remaining child, young Charles Cotton, and she has plans for him too. She offers him to the local workhouse.
Here's another one for you.
She foolishly remarked to Riley that the boy's a weakling. He'll never grow up. Riley thought, looked healthy enough to me, to which Marianne replied, he'll go the same way as the rest of the Cotton family.
In July 1872, Mary Ann kills for the last time. She has fulfilled her promise to Riley. 7-year-old Charles Cotton, the last of the Cotton family, avoids the workhouse and dies of a fever on the 12th of July. Mary Ann has now killed a minimum of 16 and possibly as many as 21 members of her own family.
She's looking for control of her life and of other people's lives, especially when they intrude on hers. It's a terrible kind of power, but for a woman in a century who has no power given to her, the power of arsenic might have been something almost fascinating.
Psycho.
I'm not so sure she'd actually got pleasure from killing. I think she got pleasure from the start of the relationship and the build-up of the relationship. And I think the killing then became an expediency. It was the way to deal with the situation. The only way you remove people, you either get rid of them and you get them out of life so you can move on to the next bit.
Is she calculating on the next kill or a new life that she hopes she's going to achieve through the past kills?
She had no sense of right and wrong, and she didn't really feel accountable. She did what she felt she had to do. What was important to her was what she needed.
One needs to understand her more in terms of an opportunistic killer. She was quite self-centered. She clearly was antisocial. She stole. She was deceptive.
She was a great one for insurance policies, and she was a great spender of money and enjoyed looking nice to attract other men. She was certainly a very detached killer. She saw that her needs were paramount, and therefore, if they weren't meeting her needs, she just simply removed them. So in that sense, you could call her very cold-blooded.
She certainly fits the profile of being aware that she needed to stay one step ahead of the law. Clearly, there are traits in her that showed she was able to plan ahead. She was quite ruthless with her thinking.
Mary Ann Cotton showed no remorse, killing husbands, her own children, her stepchildren, and in fact it was the death of a 7-year-old stepchild that finally led to her downfall.
I think certainly when you tell people that your very healthy son is going to be dead within a week, and then he does die within a week, you're going to let yourself open to suspicions.
The local overseer, Riley, is incensed, and he shares his suspicions with the boy's GP, Dr. Kilburn, who then refuses to issue the death certificate. The police are called in. Post-mortem and then an inquest are carried out the following day.
The post-mortem on Charles Cotton was carried out in an environment which, to our standards, would seem primitive and quite absurd. He was basically laid out on his stepmother's table, and the general practitioner went about cutting up the body and investigations. Dr. Kilburn conducts the post-mortem, but of course he wasn't looking for arsenical poisoning, right? And he ends up with a kind of a vague sense that there were some things that were not really right, but it was not really clear exactly how it is that you would interpret this kind of mass of indicators. He goes from the kitchen to the pub and says, I find nothing completely unusual. I would consider this a case of natural death.
The death certificate is finally released to Mary Ann, and she tries to make her last insurance claim. But Dr. Kilburn's suspicions are such that he's taken samples from the boy's body for further testing.
He then took the contents of the stomach and performed what was a common test for the presence of arsenic, which is the Wunsch test. And so on that grounds, he says, okay, well, there's an indication that it might be arsenic. And then what he does is he sends material over to Thomas Scattergood, who is a forensic toxicologist based in Leeds.
The forensic lab confirmed arsenic poisoning. Mary Ann Cotton was arrested the next morning.
3 bodies were exhumed from West Auckland Parish Church. Frederick Cotton Jr., Robert Robson Cotton, and Joseph Matros. For several days there were huge crowds around the ancient graveyard.
Mary Ann Cotton, why did she kill her children? I think that's one of the imponderables, really. And I'm not sure it was ever really asked at the trial why she killed them.
There's significant things in people's lives, such as fathers dying or new stepfathers coming in, relationship issues with members of the family. I think it's very difficult to identify when these are going to take on a significance in later life, because they mean different things to different people. But some people actually can take the most insignificant issues in terms of relationships and what's been done, and later on you'd be surprised how important they have become for them.
Given that she killed her mother, there was probably some ambivalence in her relationship with her mother prior to her father's death. And therefore it's reasonable to suppose that perhaps at an earlier stage of her development she had also suffered difficulties. Not only would there have been perhaps the personal impact of that bereavement, but there would have been also the sociological consequences for the family in the sense of that was the bread earner that had died and the family faced destitution. And that must have generated intense anxiety.
I think we can safely say that Mary Ann Cotton clearly didn't like children. And I think she got bored of them as she did her husband's. But what takes a person over the edge to become a murderer? Was it the death of her father at such a young age? Was it watching her mother struggle with the grind and poverty of mining life? What exactly does turn an ordinary girl into a ruthless serial killer?
Hoes be crazy.
What we'd be thinking about would be pathological development. What contribution nurture may have contributed, what contribution the environment might have contributed, and then to look at what led up to the initial serious offence, which of course may have been preceded by multiple other offences, and then most importantly to explore what might have led from the first serious offence to a second serious offence.
If they're psychopaths, then there's no feeling of anything. So mourning is not an aspect of it. We know that many do have some sense of regret, but they very quickly overcome that. But then the need to relive the fantasy starts coming back.
It certainly appears to be the case that the women serial killers do have a different profile, and poisoning and suffocation tend to be very popular means of killing.
Poison is a very physically non-aggressive way of doing, but a very aggressive way of actually killing somebody. It means you don't have actually physical contact with them, and you can watch them dying without having any qualms.
Poison is such a detached way to kill someone, give them a few grains of arsenic and then just walk away. But how is that even conceivable? How can a mother murder her own children?
Women whose development has for whatever reason, not gone the way the generally normal development would go, their capacity to develop that bond with the child is compromised. They don't actually conceptualize the child as being separate from them.
I think Mary Ann Cotton was essentially a psychopath who perhaps killed people for the money, just for the sake of the money, just for greed. I don't think there's any justification in saying it was the social conditions in which she lived, because there were many other people.
No, hoes be crazy.
Conditions.
This guy knows it. He's like, she's fucking crazy.
To Mary Ann Cotton.
Psycho bitch.
Character made her an exceptional person in a rather notorious way.
With most women with severe violent behaviour, the victims are known to them.
Women serial killers, they kill with their caring, they kill in their environment, they kill in their house.
It's almost impossible to know what drove Mary Ann Cotton's kill, but whatever her reason, she was about to reveal a final twist in her sinister tale. The more I look at the life of Mary Ann Cotton, the more it amazes me that she managed to kill so many people. But our Black Widow Ladykiller must reveal one last twist to her gruesome story. While awaiting trial in Durham prison, Mary Ann revealed that she was pregnant once again. Her trial had to be delayed for 6 months, during which time the horrific details of the Mary Ann Cotton case began to emerge to an eagerly awaiting press and public.
This woman would not stop having babies.
She was not thought to be fit for trial in a state of pregnancy, so she had several months to wait to deliver it in itself, and that then became a window of opportunity for journalists to go and investigate, follow the trail, as it were, and to create a circumstantial case which made her even more sort of valuable as a news commodity.
It was quite a common tactic throughout the 19th century that women would get pregnant either during the trial, just before the trial, even in the earlier 19th century when they were in the same room as men, during their time of incarceration, to get pregnant while they were in prison, because then they could what's called plead the belly.
I think there was no sympathy for her in the press. The British press had been pretty sensational for 100 years, particularly about murders, particularly about child murders. Mary Ann really was a figure of hatred, an icon of murder.
There were rhymes made up about her. Parents used to frighten their children that she was coming if they were naughty. At schools all over England, news travelled fast. There'd be playground games about her.
In a Victorian age, which put so much store by this moral and spiritual superiority of women, women were meant to be those who were going to save men from themselves. Women were meant to be those who were going to create a home. And in that home, all was going to be sweetness and light in that rough world outside where men had to do business.
Men wanted to believe that they could trust women. At the same time, stories like this made them aware that really they couldn't, especially if the women that they were trusting had some reason to feel aggrieved. And I think it made men uncomfortable that women could kill and would kill, especially to the extent that Mary Ann Cotton did it.
I don't think most women want to kill babies.
She does absolutely the opposite thing to what women are meant to do. She kills her husbands. She doesn't just kill other people's children. She kills her own. She's a monster.
Victorian society didn't like executing women. It was extremely rare for such a thing to happen. It had been 74 years since the previous execution of a woman in County Durham. So the mere notion of a serial killer being a woman, and on top of that, a woman who may have accounted for 21 people, most of them closely related to her, for the insurance money, it was just incredible.
On the 7th of January, 1873, Margaret Edith Quick Manning was born in Durham Prison. The trial of Mary Ann Cotton took place during the month of March 1873. She was still breastfeeding her new baby whilst in the dock.
The public reacted to the Cotton case as though she were a witch. I think the British public just gave a collective shudder. If there could be a woman like that walking around just casually giving arsenic to people who were in the way or whose death would give her a small amount of money, then she would just do it and nobody noticed.
Yeah, the press did have a go. They would, wouldn't they? I don't blame them for that, and it's a great case. And she was an awful serial killer. On the other hand, when you see these people, they don't look like serial killers, hugging a baby, breastfeeding in court.
She made a terrible fuss when they took the baby away from her for the last time. And some people thought this was terrible, that a woman should be executed. People completely forgot that she had already killed 11 of these babies that she had nurtured and brought up, and that this child stood a very small chance of surviving into adulthood unless her mother was executed.
It took the jury just 1 hour to return with their verdict.
A miserable 7:55 a.m. affair. She's in her cell. Carl Croft, the public executioner, comes with his assistant, Evans. They would put a leather belt on her waist. They would manacle her hands, and then they would attach the manacles to the belt. Then it was about 2 minutes into the yard, where a very simple scaffold would be, and she'd be asked to stand on the trapdoor.
Her newborn baby, Margaret Edith Quick Manning, is taken from Mary Ann shortly before she goes to the gallows.
Then they moved very fast. No words, no orders. Bind the legs, cap over her head, pull the lever, and down she goes.
She actually had the worst hangman in Britain, who was in his 70s, very frail and weak, had a reputation for being cruel, didn't used to hang them properly, didn't put the rope against the side of the neck so that the neck broke.
It took a grueling 3 minutes for Mary Ann Cotton to suffocate. Her body was then cut down and placed in a coffin and buried within Durham prison grounds.
I think Mary Ann Cotton's legacy throughout the country now, I don't think many people will have heard of her, but if you come to Durham and you mention the name Mary Ann Cotton, you immediately get the reply, Mary Ann Cotton, she's dead and she's rotten, which are the words of is a skipping line that children use, and you still get that today.
The truth is, we can never, ever get to it, why a woman should murder in that way, on that scale. Well, actually, why she should murder at all.
I don't think anyone should be murdering man.
Feel like she did? Answer, no idea.
Mary Ann Cotton very nearly got away with mass murder. If I'd written Mary's story as one of my novels, I don't think anyone would believe me. From Mary Ann's family, her third husband, James Robinson, and their son, George, escaped death. Her only other surviving child was Margaret Edith Quick Manning. Born in Durham jail, she was adopted, changed her name, and she went on to live a long and happy life.
Well, at least some of the kids lived. Alrighty. Let's watch another one. How's everyone doing? Let's see. Russell, thanks for that. Do you think Cecil would ever do such a terrible thing to Peaches all to himself? Oh, fuck you. Borg, thanks for the super chat, dude. Did you see the new David Bowie movie on Netflix? Or Hulu? No, I did not, because I don't have Hulu. I saw, like, the trailers for it, and I don't think I want to watch it. I don't know if it'll do him justice. Alright. Let's see. Let's see. This one looks like it's good. Watch this one. I'm gonna just blow through this channel.
Spokane, Washington State, August the 1st, 1998. On a notorious downtown strip known as the Track, a 46-year-old male picked up a sex worker called Christine.
Uh-oh.
The woman did not know it yet, but the man at the wheel was a serial killer. He pretended to be exactly what he wasn't. The all-American hero, family man, was actually a sex addict.
Oh.
Prostitutes for pleasure.
Oh, is this the green, like, river guy?
With her, the killer pulled out his .25 caliber handgun and shot the woman in the head.
Uh-oh.
She later found bullet fragments in her head.
She had this incredible rush with death and miraculously had escaped with only a bullet wound.
Christine was the only one that survived an attack by Robert Lee Yates Jr. For more than 20 years, Yates preyed on vulnerable young women in and around the Pacific Northwest. Typically, once someone got into his car, their fate was sealed.
Yates simply discarded them as if they were trash that he'd thrown out of his vehicle, and then he'd get rid of them after he'd had his fun.
When this all-American family man was finally caught, he was convicted of killing 14 young women and one man. However, it's suspected he may have murdered many more. That makes Robert Lee Yates Jr. one of the world's most evil killers.
He literally says every guy's one of the most evil killers.
Spokane, Washington. For more than 20 years, between 1975 and 1998, a serial killer was on the loose across America's Pacific Northwest. 50-year-old war hero Robert Lee Yates Jr. shocked the world when he was found guilty of mercilessly killing 14 women and one man.
He didn't look like a monster. He looked like an average Joe. And he was a father of 5. He lived in a middle-class neighborhood. He was seen as respectable. He was a decorated pilot in the US Army National Guard.
He has several tours in Germany. He becomes chief warrantorist. In every respect, an all-American hero. The sort of chap that you hang bunting out for when he returns home.
But for more than 20 years, Robert Lee Yates led a double life. At night, he was a cold-blooded serial killer, preying on vulnerable young women, mostly in the city of Spokane. Local journalist Bill Morlin covered the story of the murders.
The common ingredient in these deaths were the women had been picked up on an area in Spokane called East Sprague. It's an area east of the downtown area, and sometimes called the Track. The women would be picked up, and he apparently would engage in sexual activities. In some instances, he engaged in drug use with these women, and then would shoot them, usually in the head. Most of the murders were committed by a .25 caliber handgun. Their bodies would be found many times in drainage ditches or in semi-wooded areas outside of town.
Special Agent Norm Brown is a seasoned investigator. In 1998, he supervised the task force assigned to track down the killer.
This one stands out in that it involved the deaths of so many innocent people. It was very challenging to find this person. The Spokane community was on edge during this investigation. A number of people thought that the investigators weren't doing enough to catch the killer at the time because the victims were prostitutes. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The victims were humans. They didn't deserve to die. So we were bound and determined to find him.
At the start of the investigation, Yates was not a suspect.
He wasn't on our radar. There was nothing that pointed us in his direction as being the serial killer.
This killer story begins in 1952. On May the 27th, Robert Lee Yates Jr. was born in Spokane and was raised in the small town of Oak Harbor, Washington.
Robert Lee Yates' father worked on a local naval base. He was a blue-collar worker. He had a very close relationship with his father. I think he idolized him. and his father was a coach for a little league baseball team.
Yates's time at school was very normal.
Robert Lee Yates Jr. played baseball at school, but he wasn't the star on the team. He was good at his schoolwork, but he wasn't the smart person in the class. He was just average. So there was nothing that stood out. There was nothing that said that this family would be the family that would produce a serial killer.
To the outside world, the Yateses were a happy, contented, all-American family.
In many ways, Yates's relationship with his father was completely normal. Usually it's thought that even one positive role model is sufficient to stop people from becoming seriously psychiatrically disturbed. And yet it didn't do anything here. We have to ask ourselves the question why.
When investigators dug into Yates' family history, they discovered something shocking.
We learned that his grandmother killed his grandfather.
Oh.
There's some violence in the family, obviously.
His grandmother didn't just kill his grandfather, but she killed him in an especially gruesome way. She took an axe to him.
Whoa.
And then was committed to a mental institution. And that becomes, I suspect, an intergenerational message, which is women are very dangerous.
Yeah.
They have what you want, but they're very dangerous people.
While there was a violent history in the family, Yates himself allegedly suffered some trauma when he was just 6 years old.
We often find in serial killers that violence is actually rooted in shame. That shame is often something that has happened during the childhood, something that the child felt they had no control over, but something that they felt judged by, something that made them feel less worthy. Robert Lee Yates was sexually assaulted by another child who was a neighbour.
But Yates kept the assault a secret. The incident was never reported to police. After graduating high school, Yates met his first wife. In 1972, aged 20, Yates and his wife moved to the small town of Walla Walla in Washington State, where they enrolled in college. There he spent his free time alone in the woods, hunting, hiking, and fishing.
The parents of his wife, years later, say actually he was quite a loner. We never really got to know him. Even though he was married to their daughter, he was somebody who was quite insular. And it's that constant theme of invisibility.
Yates's marriage to his first wife ended in divorce just 18 months later. However, he had already begun a new relationship with another woman. In December that year, Yates got a job at the Washington State Penitentiary, and the first of their 5 children was born. In July 1976, they were married.
He works as a prison officer, and this is a job that's about the enforcement of rules and regulations, it's about status, and it's about power, and it's about authority. And this also coincides with his first murder.
On July the 13th, 1975, a 23-year-old Yates was practicing shooting targets just outside town near Mill Creek when he came across 2 students. Lifelong friends Susan, aged 22, and Patrick, aged 21, were having a picnic.
This was an area that he knew quite well. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and he was fairly confident that he wasn't going to be disturbed. And it wouldn't surprise me if he'd been fantasizing about this for quite some time. And he comes across 2 college graduates, and he decides that he's going to kill them. And that's what he does. He literally shoots them in cold blood.
And rage burst out. He acted entirely instinctively and shot them both. It is unimaginable. Why would you do that? There is something profoundly out of kilter in Yates's personality. For Yates, simply murdering the young friends was not enough.
He placed the body of Susan on top of that of Patrick, and Susan's body, he removed a lot of her clothing. So this is really humiliating. This is really demeaning.
Yates left the bodies by the side of the creek and covered them with a pile of rubbish, a sleeping bag, and an old tire.
Yates essentially assassinates. And what his motivation was is, I mean, it's anyone's guess. Did he think that his people were being sinful? Did it go against his religious upbringing? I'm only speculating. There's no way of knowing. He's never talked about what motivated him to kill that young couple.
This would have been an escalation of behaviour rather than a switch being flipped. People don't just decide to kill overnight. They don't turn into murderers one day, having been completely normal the previous day. I think that he was probably stalking people. He was probably fantasizing about harming others.
Walla Walla, Washington, 1977. 2 years after murdering 2 students at Mill Creek, the killer, 25-year-old Robert Lee Yates Jr., joined the Army. In October, he decided to become a pilot, but during his 18 years of service, he could not contain his murderous urges.
There was one interesting incident when he was serving in Somalia. He allegedly shot a pig from the helicopter. And that wouldn't have been an easy thing to achieve in a moving airborne vehicle. It's something that he did that he didn't have to do. He wanted to prove to himself that he could hit a target from that far away.
Wherever Warrant Officer Yates was stationed, trouble seemed to follow.
Women in that area near where he'd been stationed, many of them prostitutes, suddenly ended up there.
But without conclusive evidence, Yates was never tied to these mysterious murders.
Apparently, because of the lapse of time and because of technology issues, there was no DNA saved from some of those victims.
On April the 1st, 1996, the father of 5, 44-year-old Yates made a surprising decision. After nearly 2 decades of distinguished service, he resigned his position.
He pulls out and suddenly returns to Spokane. He only had to serve a further 18 months before he would have got a full military pension. Now, why would a man with 5 children and a wife suddenly decide to leave the army? I think the answer lies in another killing.
In August 1995, Dale County, Alabama. 8 months before Yates's resignation, a 19-year-old transvestite prostitute was shot in the face by an unknown killer. The body was found dumped on the roadside bordering Fort Rucker, an Army aviation base where Yates had been stationed at the time for training. A culprit was never found, but some continue to speculate.
I think that unknown killer was Robert Lee Yates Jr. And I think that's why he left the army suddenly. That I feel that he was appalled. Here is a woman who is actually a man. I think Yates flipped, and I think that's why he suddenly snatched his wife and family out of a very good army career, which was about to see him get a substantial and generous pension and take them back to Spokane out of the blue.
And this is a real pivotal moment, I think, in his life, because he's somebody who operates quite well when there are boundaries around him. But now those boundaries are gone, I think we're going to see some changes.
Though it's never been proven, he's suspected of committing 2 other murders between 1995 and 1996 in Washington state. And in the following year, Yates picked up the pace.
He was intent on killing, and intent on killing prostitutes. He would target prostitutes, perhaps because they were easy, perhaps because no one would miss them.
In 1997, Yates joined the Army National Guard, hoping to become a helicopter pilot.
We have him entering yet another career that involves him enforcing the law. So this is something that enables him to continue having that power and that control and that status.
But Yates's flying career was quickly put on hold as his medical results were being processed.
He's grounded. He's not allowed to fly his helicopter. Now, this is a pivotal moment for me because somebody else has taken control. Somebody else has made that decision. He's not the one that's in the driving seat anymore.
Despite not initially being able to fly, he remains in the National Guard. But with a large family to support, he takes on a menial job at a manufacturing plant in Spokane. And all the while, Yates continued to kill.
I think the murders that he committed were an attempt to get back control. I think there were things happening in his life that he felt were out of his control, and he wanted to feel powerful again.
His new hunting ground was the seedy strip in downtown Spokane, known as the Track.
Prostitutes to Yates were easy targets in that they would get into his vehicle without any questions asked. They would just decide what money was going to be exchanged for services. And the prostitutes were very vulnerable because most of them were drug addicts and would sell themselves for money and use it to buy drugs.
Robert Lee Yates was very much a regular face on the sex worker scene in this part of town at the time. So he wouldn't just pick up women to have sex with, he would do drugs with them. He became part of their community. And I think he would be trusted by them. He was somebody that they knew.
In the summer of 1997, Yates picked up 20-year-old Heather from the downtown Track to have sex with her.
I suspect that the victims may not have known even the second before they died that this was going to be a killing, because I suspect their interaction went down much as an interaction with the prostitute did. And then when he was done, he draws his gun and he shoots.
Yates shot Heather in the head with a .22 caliber handgun.
Literally, there's just a second that the victim becomes aware that something's amiss, and after that, the victim is dead.
After Yates murdered Heather, he dumped her body on the side of the road.
Well, he was brazen in his thought as far as dumping the bodies.
In August that year, Yates was back on the Track looking for easy prey. He picked up 16-year-old Jennifer. Like the young woman before her, her fate was a foregone conclusion.
Unlike many serial killers, the way that Yates kills is instrumental. He has sex with his victims, and then he pulls out a gun and he shoots them. They die virtually instantaneously at the hand of somebody who knows how to use weapons effectively. He's not trying to torture, he's not trying to terrorize, he's simply eliminating the witness.
He watches as the life literally drains from them. And this is an individual who's not going to stop because his offending is getting worse. It's becoming more sadistic.
Once dead, Yates prepared to move Jennifer's body, a ritual he would repeat time and time again.
After shooting them in the head, he put bags over their head, largely to keep his car clean. I mean, he didn't want the blood dripping out, and would put plastic bags over their heads to keep the mess off his car.
10 days later, local farmers found Jennifer's badly decomposed body. It had been dumped in brush northeast of Spokane.
This site where Jennifer was found, it was next to a working farm near to an alfalfa field. So he's not really seeming too bothered about covering up. It seems that he just wants to get away at this point in time.
That same day, officers made another grim discovery, another of his victims.
Heather was found in a field in a parking lot off the strip in East Spokane.
Robert Yates would typically bury them slightly or partially. Other times he'd cover them with debris. Many of them were found nude or semi-nude. They were discarded like trash along the road.
And that's exactly how he saw these women. He saw them as disposable. He saw them for just his own pleasure, and then he'd get rid of them after he'd had his fun.
But this time, these Spokane-based detectives had a vital lead.
We received a tip that one of the victims, Jennifer Joseph, was last seen getting into a white Corvette.
On the 24th of September 1997, a local police officer patrolling the Track pulled Yates for speeding.
And the police officer actually had stopped him to fill out a report, but in the vehicle description, instead of writing down Corvette, the officer wrote down CAM, apparently referring to a Camaro.
The police officer actually wrote down that he was in a different kind of car, and that meant that they missed Robert Lee Yates.
Later that autumn, Yates picked up Darla, a 28-year-old sex worker, on the Track.
He would pick up these women, he would shoot them in the head, and then he would bury their bodies. So this was very cold, this was very kind of executioner style.
Darla's body was found on November the 5th, 1997, 10 miles south of downtown Spokane on Hangman Valley Road.
I visited the recovery site of Darla, and she was dumped in some bushes by some trees and rolled down a hill, but not very far off the Hangman Valley Road, where I often rode my bicycle for exercise. When I ride by there, I always think of her. My heart goes out to her and her family because she was treated like trash after she was killed.
In December that year, Yates's killing spree spread some 300 miles east to Tacoma, an area he's familiar with.
As a pilot with the Western Army National Guard, he was based here in Spokane, but on certain weekends he would travel to the other side of the state, near Tacoma, Washington, where he would do military weekend drills.
On December the 6th, Yates chose his next victim. He picked up 34-year-old sex worker Melinda.
Robert E. Yates didn't just target an area that he was familiar with. He would be carrying out his crimes in areas where he just happened to find himself. He was in Tacoma on one particular date, and this coincided with the murder of Melinda.
Melinda's body was found the following day, dumped in wasteland by a railroad track.
I think at this point, he's becoming quite arrogant. He's not gotten caught so far, so he's pushing the boundaries a little bit. And you see this happen with quite a lot of serial killers. They have this kind of proneness to boredom, this need for stimulation, this need to kind of mix things up a bit. And I think that's what he's doing when he's killing outside of the area he knows.
By the end of 1997, the 45-year-old serial killer had shot and murdered at least 12 innocent people. Most were vulnerable young women.
I think the fact that sex workers in this area were still going out and still working, even though they knew that their friends and their acquaintances were being killed by the serial killer, just shows what desperate circumstances these women live in. They have to go out, they have to work for money, often to feed drug habits.
On December the 22nd, 1997, police set up a special task force in Spokane to catch the serial killer terrorizing America's Pacific Northwest. But the killings that holiday season continued unabated.
Robert E. Yates murders Sonny during the Christmas period of 1997, where most people are celebrating the festivities with their families. This really does show me
Does his wife
serial
never
killers
notice?
Don't take time out. They don't stop for the holidays. They want to keep killing because they enjoy it, because it gives them power and it gives them control.
A day after Christmas, detectives discovered the lifeless bodies of two more women. Both were found within the Spokane city limits.
Laurel and Sean, their bodies were found at the same time. Laurel was shot in the head and discarded like a piece of rubbish. Sean was another one of Robert Lee Yates' victims, and I think he was getting a little bit arrogant. He was getting a little bit sloppy at the time of her killing. So after he killed her, he placed the plastic bag over her head, and there was a print that was found on that bag, and that turned out to be his print. So as he's becoming more bold, as he's becoming more confident, he's starting to make mistakes.
Fear amongst the general public escalated as the murders across the Pacific Northwest continued.
By the end of the 90s, there were like a dozen or so of these prostitutes who had turned up dead, and there was no killer in custody. And by then, everyone was saying, we have a serial killer in our midst, and something needs to be done about it.
I think the impact of his crimes on the community were incredibly significant, because here's this guy who appears to be completely regular, completely average, completely invisible, to be honest, somebody who didn't really stand out, and yet he was able to wreak such havoc across the community.
By January 1998, the number of unsolved murder cases in Spokane had drastically risen. The FBI was called in to assist the Spokane Task Force in catching the killer.
The Spokane Serial Killer Task Force had hundreds of leads to begin with, turned into thousands of leads. Some of those leads were interstate, in fact, even in other countries. So they asked the FBI to get involved.
Special Agent Norm Brown was the FBI's liaison officer who coordinated efforts and resources with the Spokane Serial Killer Task Force.
It's difficult to work these type of cases because we know women are being killed the longer we can't find the serial killer. So we're anxious to find the killer. So that works on the head, the hearts of the investigators. We spent about 100 hours plus following leads and helping the task force. It was challenging. We tried to think why the killer would pick this site to dump the bodies. Generally, they're found in fields or in wooded areas, but not always. A couple of bodies were found within the city limits.
On January the 19th, 1998, the task force sponsored a candlelit vigil to memorialize the many women who'd been murdered on the streets of Spokane, in the hope it would lead to more information about the killer.
There was a lot of community outrage. A lot of people thought that the law enforcement authorities weren't giving us enough attention because of who these victims were. There were candlelight vigils, and of course, there were undercover police there watching to see who would show up.
But there were no further leads. 4 months later, Yates sold his white Corvette, a car he'd been stopped in for speeding in on the track by police the previous year. He began prowling his favorite hunting ground in a big black van.
Robert Lee Yates really is the embodiment of the arrogant, narcissistic serial killer who really does know his patch, that he would go up and down. And he set up his vehicle as a mobile sex unit. So this is a guy who's very confident in what he's doing. He's hiding in plain sight. He's almost taunting the police, essentially, and saying, hey, everybody, look at me, look what I'm up to, and none of you have caught me yet.
In May 1998, Yates picked up 43-year-old Melody downtown. Like his previous victims, he followed the same deadly routine. After he'd had sex with her, he killed her. Melody was reported missing by her family shortly after she disappeared. Even with support from the FBI, the task force were unable to locate her body.
Melody had been missing for several days, weeks, and then months. She was last seen living with her sister in Minnesota, or that she was working the streets in Tennessee or selling drugs in California. None of these leads panned out. It's like she just dropped off the face of the earth.
Shortly after Melody's murder, the overconfident killer began to make a series of mistakes. In July that year, Yates picked up 47-year-old Michelin downtown. This time, Yates buried her body close to home, a block from the manufacturing company in Spokane where he worked.
The body of Michelin was actually found near Robert Lee Yates's place of work, and I think this shows how arrogant and how incredibly confident he was becoming in his killing. Very often, serial killers will keep a clear separation between their work life and their home life and their killing, but it's starting to merge into one.
Police questioned a number of employees who worked at the manufacturing company, including Yates. But with no evidence to link him to the murder, no further action was taken.
And he's actually interviewed in relation to the discovery of this body. And part of me thinks he probably quite enjoyed that. He probably quite enjoyed the police asking him questions, knowing that he knew all along who was responsible.
Like many serial killers, he starts slow and begins to escalate, and the frequency of the killing and the amount of the killing gets more and more. And there's something else that becomes more and more over time. He makes less and less efforts to hide the bodies after a while.
But Yates's luck was about to run out. On August 1st, 1998, Yates picked up another sex worker, Christine Smith, in downtown Spokane.
Christine Smith got inside the van of Robert Yates, attempted to perform oral sex on him, and during that process, she felt a sharp blow to her head. And she immediately got out, ran away.
It was like a glancing blow. She didn't even realize initially that she'd been shot. It was a superficial wound near her ear, as I recall.
Christine Smith's case really is absolutely astounding. She thought she'd just been stabbed. she managed to escape the car and go and get help from people. This is a witness who has survived. This is a witness who can identify him, and it's only a matter of time before the police catch up with him.
Despite Christine's escape, Yates was unable to contain the urge to kill. In September, he was on the hunt again. Sex worker Connie was his next victim. Her body was found weeks later by a search and rescue dog down an embankment in Pierce County, Tacoma.
These women turning up dead, and most of them were prostitutes. And it was the common theme with these victims. And they were difficult to find.
It's the first one where it had hair in it.
And they were turning up dead one at a time. And many of these cases would result in just, a short little news item on the evening news or in the newspaper.
The following month, Yates went on the prowl to his favorite hunting ground, the track. On November the 10th, 1998, he picked up sex worker Jennifer. But before Yates could make his move, they were pulled over and his details were taken down.
And the police officer actually had stopped him and filled out a police report about suspicious activity. He had a young woman in the car with him, and there was no criminal conduct that he could be arrested on the spot for.
Okay.
And the police officer filled out a report.
Time to edit.
The police encounter saved Jennifer's life. Yates immediately
It's like, Rick, yeah, no kidding. That's what I thought. He shot her in the head while she was getting to bed. Yeah, no kidding. It's like
Spokane, Washington.
He wasn't worried about his junk.
After almost 30 years, Robert Lee Yates Jr., the serial killer responsible for at least 13 murders, is still on the loose. Following 2 police interviews the previous year, detectives discovered that Yates had once owned a white Corvette, a car linked to one of the victims found in 1997.
There was a witness who saw Jennifer Joseph getting into a white Corvette on that summer evening that she disappeared. And a white Corvette is quite a distinctive vehicle. It's one that you're not going to mistake for something else. And this is something that's going to be really important in the conviction of Robert Lee Yates.
On September the 15th, 1999, 47-year-old Yates was brought in for questioning.
Robert Lee Yates is called in by the police and he can't account for his whereabouts on a couple of the key dates. One of the things that really does trip him up is the police are presenting their evidence to him and they say about a white Camaro being seen. And he corrects them. He goes, oh no, it's not a Camaro, it's a Corvette.
Yates' admission was a breakthrough, but it wasn't enough to arrest him. Police needed more evidence to link him to the Washington
What a
murder.
dumbass.
Yates was released the same day. The task force issued a search warrant and tracked down
He basically
the
admitted it.
1977 white Corvette that Yates had sold.
They pulled registrations for every white Corvette in Idaho and Washington in this region and winnowed that down and ultimately located the Corvette that Robert Yates had once owned.
The task force recovered Yates's white Corvette and submitted it to forensic examination.
Investigators were able to recover evidence that linked Yates to the killing of one of the prostitutes.
One of the victims, Jennifer Joseph, had carpet fibers on her body. They processed that car and found the same kind of carpet threads that matched Jennifer.
Dun-dun-dun.
Jennifer Joseph had been murdered 2 years earlier, and her body was found in an alfalfa field northeast of Spokane.
The detectives meticulously took the Corvette apart, and in that process, they found a small button that matched the kind of button that was on the clothing worn by Jennifer Joseph. They then knew that Jennifer Joseph had been in that vehicle prior to her death.
Investigators also found a number of bloodstains. When tested, they revealed DNA belonging to Jennifer.
They knew that her murder had been in that vehicle before she'd been dumped in a field northwest of Spokane.
All of the evidence is starting to match up and it leads them right back to Robert Lee Yates.
The task force put in a warrant for Yates's arrest.
By the time the detectives get a warrant for his arrest, they were 100% certain they got the gun.
On April the 17th of 2000, the task force put Yates under 24-hour surveillance.
The police had staked out the family home, made sure that he was there, and after he left for work at 6 o'clock the following morning, they moved in and they arrested him.
The same day, detectives searched Yates's house for further
Uploading
evidence.
it right now.
Immediately after his arrest, a sample of Yates's DNA was taken and compared with samples collected from a number of murder victims found between 1996 and 1998.
It was tested that day and came back late that afternoon. I recall that we were at the Yates home conducting a search when we got word that the DNA matched Robert Yates. At least 8 of the victims had the same DNA found on them, so we knew we were dealing with a serial killer. All investigators were very happy. We were actually elated.
The day after Yates was apprehended, a newspaper report was released detailing his arrest. Upon seeing it, former sex worker Christine Smith instantly recognized Yates as being the man who shot her in the back of his van in August of 1998.
How did she survive? Why aren't we talking about
At the time
that?
of the incident, she thought she'd been stabbed and had reported it to police.
It wasn't until a couple of years later, when she was involved in a car wreck, that she went to the hospital and they discovered shrapnel in her head. And then she realizes that she's actually been shot. She hasn't been stabbed.
She didn't know she got shot?
And pulled the trigger. And not only that, this person who's done this is Robert Lee Yates, and she realizes I could have been one of his victims.
Christine's evidence helped connect the final pieces of the puzzle.
Her coming forward was very crucial to the task force. She came forward, provided information to law enforcement. She was a living victim, if you will. It's a living person that could testify against Robert Yates.
A month later, in May of 2000, investigators meticulously searched Yates's black van. They discovered blood pertaining to 2 other victims, 3 bullet holes, and spent bullets and bullet debris.
How did his wife not notice any of this?
When the task force finally got to her, they had the bullet fragment surgically removed, and it ballistically matched up to the same weapon that was used in some of these other killings.
While searching Yates's property, investigators discovered the murder weapons.
He used handguns. Some of the victims may also have been killed with a 22, but most of the murders were committed by a 25 caliber handgun.
The task force now had enough evidence to charge him with a total of 13 murders and the attempted murder of Christine Smith. In October of 2000 at the Spokane Superior Court, Yates faced his charges. In front of a packed room, the serial killer took to the stand and made a shock plea.
Yates, the surprise of many, goes to court and pleads guilty to 13 counts of murder
Jesus.
and 1 count of attempted murder.
The callous killer avoided going to trial by pleading guilty to the murders.
Robert Lee Yates struck a plea bargain. He confessed to 13 murders and actually got life in prison without the possibility of parole.
As part of the deal, Yates revealed a horrible secret.
Robert Yates agreed to disclose the location of Melanie. None of the investigators knew where she was. The family didn't know where she was either. So he agreed to lead us to her body.
Using Yates's hand-drawn map, the task force excavated an area to the east side of the killer's home.
Oh, God.
The body was located in Robert Yates's yard.
Oh, my God. What does his wife think about all this?
So to speak. It was pretty horrendous. When the investigators were conducting the search inside the house, no one ever dreamt that she would be buried right outside his bedroom. We were surprised.
Look at that house.
And dejected to know that he would do such a thing.
This says he wants to be able to watch over the body of this victim, to have control over this crime scene.
There's obviously some sadistic kind of a thrill associated with that. I mean, his body was buried at his family home, right outside the bedroom where he and his wife slept.
Yates's deal with the police saved his life.
That was a strong selling point, that he would give up the location of her body and he would get a life sentence as opposed to the death penalty. The investigators, including myself, believe that he should get a death sentence.
This guy's still alive. He's 70.
He ended up getting 408 years for the murders.
In 2002,
He's still married.
prosecutors in Pierce County charged Yates with 2 additional murders.
His wife is still married to him. Oh God, this chick is dumb. They didn't get divorced.
Murdered both women in Pierce County, Washington.
In 2002, he was convicted of further murders, and for those murders, he actually received the death penalty.
In October of 2002, Yates was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But Washington state has now abolished capital punishment. As a result, Yates is now serving life in prison without the possibility of parole in Washington State Penitentiary in Washington.
Psycho.
In an ironic twist of fate,
Upload, you
he's
stupid
now
thing.
housed in the same facility that he once served in as a prison guard 25 years earlier. A fitting end for the monstrous murderer.
That is the most shocking part of this. He was just the guy that everybody has living next door to him. He wasn't this three-eyed monster or some sexual psychopath or registered sex offender. I mean, he was a father.
This dude's psycho.
Modest, upscale.
I can't believe that his wife stayed with him after finding out he murdered all these people. Is this lady stupid?
Look like a monster either. He
Well,
looked like
I answered my own question.
Joe with his averageness. Is something that
He looks
actually
creepy in their family photo.
as a serial killer.
Convicted of 15 cold-blooded murders, Spokane's mass murderer is suspected of taking many more innocent lives. And that makes Robert Lee Yates Jr. one of the world's most evil killers.
You say that about everyone, dude. All right, well, this is done. I'm just waiting for this video to upload. This was the first one where it had like bangs in the photo. So I don't really think I painted it that well, but you guys can let me know if you think I should fix it when once it's uploaded. But yeah, that was I feel like I heard the same exact story, except it was like the guy was called like the Green River Killer, and he killed prostitutes too. Is that the same guy? Let me Google it. It's like Green River Killer. No, that's a different guy. But it was like almost the same story. It was like in Washington. Oh, it's uploaded. Yes. Okay, cool. All right, you see right now? It's just these guys. Let's refresh. There we go. Ah! I clicked the wrong thing. All right, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Look at it. Look at it. Okay, here we go. If you haven't yet, go follow me on the Instagrams. Go give this post a like and a comment. I'd appreciate it. Share it on your story. What's up, Rhino? Nice to see you here. Long time no talk. Very long time no talk now that I think about it. What do you guys think of the bangs, like in the photo? I'm not too particular to them, but it's in the photo. What do you guys think? Yay or nay? Let's see. Refresh my page again. Look at it. Was beautiful and all organized, and now it's going to be off once I get down to the bottom. Watch. Ah! It's not 3. It's not 3. It's going to drive me crazy. It's going to drive me crazy. Come on, go back up to the top. Whee! Well, guys, there's another eye down. That was 69. 69 eyes I have painted. That's crazy. The next eye I paint will be number 70. I'll be one step closer to finishing my project. Crazy. But I'm proud of myself that I've done this every night so far. I gotta knock on wood. I gotta keep up with it. Can't let myself slack. But now, bangs look good. That's a bit of difference to the others. Very good, great with reflections. Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know what I'm finding is my favorite part of the eye? So it's weird. It's a little thing, but so not everyone has it, but the top like fold right here on the eye, on some of them, which is on Gabby, there's like a little bit of like, it's not a wrinkle, or at least like she's very young, so on here it's like you can barely see it, but there's like just the slightest little fold on there, and I think it looks cool. Let me find a guy that has it. Him, like, see this? I like that. I think it adds a lot. Like this lady has it too. I really like that. I think that adds like an extra oomph to the eye. Not everyone has it, but I like it when people do. I've noticed that I enjoy painting that. It's very, very slight on her, but it's cool that it's there. But all right, yeah, that was it. I finished my eye painting for the day. I feel very accomplished, and yeah, I think now it's time for me to start filming my videos for the week or for tomorrow. If you guys haven't seen, my channel is finally growing again. Me telling everyone about the shadow ban has actually helped. So thank you to everyone that's helping me fight the shadow ban. I just passed 223,000 subscribers. I was stuck at 219 for like months. So thank you so much, everyone, for helping me and like fighting the shadow ban and like sharing my videos. It actually does help. So I really appreciate it. But now I think I have to watch some shows and review them and whatnot. But I think what I'm going to do is I'll film my videos, and then after I'm done, depending on how much energy I have, I might do like a late or very early morning, late night Twitch stream and play some Elden Ring when I finish my video filming for the night. That's if I'm still awake and like have energy. But everyone, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for hanging out. Please leave a comment on this live stream. And until next time, I hope you guys all have a great rest of your night, morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And may the force be with you, because we are really, really, really going to need it. Bye, everyone.